Good evening, students. Welcome to the fifth lecture called Democratic Regimes. That's right. So, we're going to see about democracy. What is democracy? And we're going to talk about the different types of democracy, then go further, dive into it, and talk about the executive branch and the types of executive branch found around the world, legislative branch and the types found around the world, and judicial branch, and then there are the types found around the world. So these three branches we see. And then I will give you examples throughout as well and talk about the advantages and disadvantages of each of them. Then we will go to the models of democracy itself. Models of democracy will include like presidential system, parliamentarian system, semi-presidential system, and we will talk about the advantages, disadvantages, examples of them, and then we will go and discuss political parties, different types, not names, types of political parties, the numbers, and different countries, what they have, and then electoral systems. Each country have different types of electoral systems. So we will discuss some of the common electoral systems in America versus other countries, because we are keeping this as a comparison to others. So as you live here and you would understand this system better than other countries. And then we will talk about referendum and initiative, and we will also talk about civil rights and civil liberties, which are vital for a democracy. We will cover all this. It's a large chunk. And we also going to talk about at what conditions democracies are formed. Okay. And when we discuss all these things, we will be done with this today's lecture. So let's start with the first and simple step, democracy. What do you think democracy means? Any idea? Demo. Demo means what? People, right? Krasia means power, rule by the people. Have you ever heard of this saying, by the people, for the people, of the people? That's right. It's Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, who said that in Gettysburg Address. And so that quote is a very famous quote from this very concise speech in Gettysburg, that democracy, because at the time there were very few democracies around the world. Now, before I come to that, let's go back further, not Lincoln's time, 2,000 years ago. Where did democracy originate? Do you know? The idea of democracy, Greece, and specifically Athenians, Athens, right? And they had a democracy which is different from what we had. So what did they have? They had something called direct democracy. What do you mean direct democracy? That's like, I got to make up an example of like people gathering in like a big auditorium. And these are the only number of voters, because you remember, city-states, small number of people compared to what we have now. The country is tiny number of people, and so they could fully be present in an auditorium. And say somebody wants to suggest that the country should go to war, he could get up and speak, and others will be like, yeah, support that. And then there will be someone who say, no, we shouldn't go to war, and he will get up and speak. And then some supporters, they will be there. So then they'll take the votes and then they decide. It's direct democracy, is people directly participating in the democratic process of policy making. Important words. Policy making. They're deciding on a policy of war, to go to war or not. For example, in the United States, do you vote for a war? Or do I vote for a war? No. Who votes for a war? Who decides? If you say the president, a lot of people get that wrong. It's the Congress which decides. It says clearly in the US Constitution that Congress has the power to declare war. So the members of Congress vote to declare war, right? So representative democracy, what we have. So we don't decide people. We send people, we vote for these people, we elect them, and they go and make decisions on our behalf. That's called representative democracy, okay? Instead of direct democracy, with the Greek Athenians had, this is indirect. We elect somebody who will make decisions on our behalf on different policies. So this is an indirect democracy. Those are two types of democracies. So the Americans, when they were creating this democracy, why am I talking about Americans when I'm talking about comparative politics? Because when they created this idea, it is very, very, very new for the time. They took something from antiquity, long back, and created a government by the people, for the people, of the people. Madison looked into both the Greece, okay, and also Roman Republic. So Rome was a republic for a long time until it fell into civil war and then became a dictatorial and then later into emperors. But beginning, it was very a republic which had senators, hundreds of senators. Rome had. So they took both the Roman model and the Greek and created a democracy in America, and all the countries in the world. Let's see whether this could succeed. And guess what? In 1940s, only 1/3 of the world's countries were democratic. Now, 80 to 90% of the 80% of the countries are democratic. Okay, so what does that say? The power of the idea of democracy have grown enormously, and so it is an important class to pay attention to, and something which you need to know to understand how the rest of the world work with this political institution, democracy. Okay, let's talk with the executive branch. Executive branch. So the executive branch, legislative branch, and judicial branch. Three are divided. The powers were divided. And in the very first lecture, I am reminding you, Charles Montesquieu, Spirit of Laws, in his book, wrote the separation of powers. He doesn't want powers all to be in the same place. So the executive branch, which is vigorous and active, which has the sword and the purse, the money. Sword means fighting. Well, he doesn't declare war, but once the war is declared, he strategizes, or woman strategizes. Executive branch, legislative branch, the money. Judicial branch, applying the laws, interpreting the laws, okay, of the Constitution to the laws created. We'll talk further about the judicial branch. So now these three branches, let's start with the executive branch. Do they have around the world the same type of system we have? No. Like what we have is a president of the United States, right? And he is the head of the state and the head of the government. What does that mean? He is the head of the state and the head of the government. Well, let's break it down. Head of the state, first write it down, head of the state. Some countries have head of the state and head of the government separated. In the US, it's together. Head of the state is someone who represents the people of the country, okay, both nationally and internationally. That's one to keep in mind. Second, they articulate the ideas of the regime, regime, the software, and they articulate it for the rest of the world what their regime is, okay? And also then third is they decide on foreign policy and waging war. When the war is decided, the President of the United States is the one who decides the strategy, how to do. Like, for example, Congress declared the World War II, and then FDR strategized, we are focusing mainly on the Nazis first, and then we will go on to defeat the Japanese. And that's what we did, okay? So the head of the state and head of the government is combined here. What about head of the government? Some countries it's separate. Head of the government. He or she will have roles on their own different from the head of the state. Like what? Their business is to run the government, running the state, not like articulating the world and telling the world internationally what their ideas and what the symbol and what they stand for, the people. So running the government and formulating and exercising the domestic policies. Domestic policies. So domestic policies are important. Like what? What is different from foreign policy to domestic policies? If you haven't taken a class, that's okay. Domestic policies will be like, say, educational policy. Okay? What type of education? What about crime? Okay? And what about environmental policy inside the country? What about interior, like selecting national parks? That's a great American idea, by the way. It was an American idea which spread around the world. Now the world has national parks. They allot the public space for everybody. So these are domestic policies that they decide. So to give you example of head of state, in England, head of the state would be the Queen, and head of the government will be the Prime Minister in the Parliament. You follow it? In India, where I come from, head of the state will be the President. But he is not also the head of the government like America. He doesn't have as much power as the Prime Minister in India. He is the head of the government. You follow it? So like that, there's divisions, head of the state and head of the government. Now let's talk about legislative branch. Legislative branch, let's talk about the United States, then it's easy to compare to others. What do we have? Legislative branch. Yes, we have something called Congress, and it has two chambers, like the heart has four chambers, two chambers. What is the two chambers? The House of Representatives and the Senate, right? So when Madison designed the two chambers, so it's called bicameral, cameral, C-A-M-E-R-A-L, bicameral. Bi means two, right? Bicameral, that idea, he looked to the British. They had the House of the Lords, which is the top branch, and the House of the Commons, which is the lower house, the upper house and the lower house. And India has a similar model of bicameral, Rajya Sabha, Lok Sabha. And many countries, the lower house have power. Okay, United States, it's different. It's different because the will of the people is represented in the House of Representatives in the United States. The Senate is designed for long view of the benefit of the state rather than pandering to the constituents. I don't want to go further digging in. If you take American government class, you will go digging into that. But now all you have to understand, American is bicameral. Many countries have bicameral, like I said. Some countries have unicameral, just one chamber legislative branch. Okay, so it's not England, it's not India, it's not the US. What countries? Denmark, Sweden in the Nordic countries have single chamber of legislative branch. And Turkey, for example, have. Monaco is a small, fancy, small country. Monaco has unicameral, unicameral, instead of bicameral, it's unicameral. So they have two branches is the word, chambers. Okay. The third branch is the Constitutional Court. Write it down, Constitutional Court. Many democracies have a constitution, right? Not all have the constitutions. Many do have constitution. Not all democracies have constitutions, written constitutions. So Constitutional Court, its job is to, so in the United States I'll talk about, and then I'll compare it to it. So this is Constitution, okay? This is the supreme law of the land. It is created and it's a blueprint for the government. And then there's the legislative branch, which creates laws regularly. That's their job, to create laws, right? And when they're creating laws, if any of those laws violate this supreme law, whose job it is? It is the job of the Constitutional Court, the Supreme Court, to tell that that law violates. It doesn't need to be Supreme Court, but Supreme Court is the highest authority to do that. It could be any of the federal courts could say that, hey, the laws created by Congress, or even the laws created by the legislative branch of the states, say in the US, Albany, New York State creates a law which violates the Constitution, it will be struck down. The justice will say, no, you can't have that law because it violates the supreme law. And they say, well, why don't you change the supreme law? Well, then there's a process for it, which is much, much harder to change. I don't want to go into all the details of how to change the US Constitution because it's not the American government class. So some countries, it's easier to change. The United States is very hard to change the US Constitution, but there is a provision to change it. you need a huge majority, more than majority, super majority to change it. So now you understand, you're following me? So they could struck down a law. That is the constitutional court's job, to make sure the laws created are not violating the supreme law of the land. Wait till I talk about civil rights and civil liberties. There I will talk about the Constitution again. There's two types, write it down, in the judicial review. There's two types of judicial review around the world. Okay, judicial review, when it was created, you know where it was created? The United States. It's in James, I'm sorry, not James Madison, John Marshall, a federal Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, created it in Marbury versus Madison. That's the case, Marbury versus Madison. I talked for a whole lecture on this case. If you take my American government class, here we don't have the time, or it is necessary. So Marbury versus Madison, that case, he ruled something that the Constitution, the law created, is violated. Congress created a law which violated the Constitution. So he struck down and he set a precedent, 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 not only for the United States, but for other countries. The other countries, they didn't do all immediately change. But now about 80% of democracies have judicial review. Okay, the courts, that's enormously powerful. One act just took over the entire country, and also spreading. It's a checks and balances to check the power of the legislative branch and the president. The president signs an executive order, which say Trump signs an executive order, and a federal court judge in California, nobody knows of, will be able to check it, saying like, no, that violates the Constitution. That executive order cannot stand. That is their power. So now the two types of judicial review, I said. The first one, what the United States does, is called concrete review. So countries do concrete review. What does that mean? Concrete review means you need a case. That means I have to be affected by the newly created law by Congress, or the legislative branch of the New York City or New York State, and that law that they created violates the Constitution, and I'm affected, and I take the case. And that's how the judge could rule, that judge or a justice of the Supreme Court, if it goes all the way, could rule that particular law is unconstitutional. Judicial review. That's concrete. They need a person who's suffered. Whereas there's another type of review. It's called abstract. You don't need anybody who has suffered from that law. And all you need is two elected representatives, either national or local representatives, appeal to the Constitutional Court and say, hey, the law created recently, it actually violates the Constitution. Can you take a look? And the justices or judges could take a look and say, yeah, that law cannot stand because it violates the Constitution, and could be struck down. Then that law is invalid. Now, some countries, they could struck down the when the law was created without anybody coming and affected person, like in America, concrete review, without any affected person. They could struck down the next day. But in some countries, they could say, hey, the law you're going to create, thinking of creating that could be unconstitutional. The court could rule. Yes. So that's how courts keep a check and balance on democracies around the world. And judicial branch plays a vital role in it. Good. Now let's talk about models of democracy. Model. When you say model, you think of, different models it has. The first model, write it down, is parliamentary model. Parliamentary systems. When I say parliamentary system, it's different from the American system, right? Americans don't call the legislative branch a parliament. We don't have a prime minister. So in the parliament system, wherever British ruled, it created a parliamentarian system, because the British had parliament, so they ruled India, colonized, and so they created a parliamentarian system. And in a parliamentarian system, you have elected members just like, say, American Congress from different districts, they call constituency, they come to the parliament, and the prime minister, the chief member of the party, is elected among the elected people in the chamber. Say 500 people are elected throughout the country, approximately, and they come to the parliament, and there will be one person who will be elected among the 500 to lead the country and also pass laws and be the head of the government. Okay, that's parliamentarian system. And we will talk about the advantages and disadvantages of each of the system, three systems. The second system is presidential system, which is what America has. Presidential system, which is for you to easy to comprehend, right? The presidential system, and many countries follow that. Many of the Latin American countries follow American system of presidential system. And what's the difference? I'll come to it. I'll explain the differences. Presidential system. And there are some countries which formulate and follow semi-presidential system. What does that mean? That means there's a president and there's a prime minister. So it's like taking a mix of both this parliamentarian and presidential system. So these are the three types. They have both the president and the prime minister. And a good example is Russia. Russia have semi-presidential system. Okay, so let's talk about the advantages, disadvantages of this system. So now let's talk about, start from parliamentarian system. The advantage of being a prime minister. Say if I'm a prime minister, it's easy to say me or you, then easy to conceptualize. I can pass a lot of laws. Why? Why can't the president pass a lot of laws, whereas you could? Because I am in the parliament, and people in the parliament, majority of them have voted for me to be the prime minister. So I already have the majority support. Boom, 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 boom. I could pass bills into laws. So it could be done. Whereas in the American system, the president could be elected, but the opposite party could be in power in Congress. So they could thwart all the bills which comes there, because they pass the laws, right? So whatever the president proposes, the Congress says, no, we don't want to do that. It could be tug of war. So that is the advantage the prime ministership has. They could pass a lot of legislation. At the same time, the prime minister, in the parliamentarian system, the prime minister could be easily removed from office. What do you mean easily removed? There's a words, write it down. No vote of confidence. That is, they lose confidence on the prime minister's ability to lead the country, and they could remove the prime minister from power. Like the people who are supporting him say, I remove my support. Boom. And what happens? Then the election happens again. The country goes into election. It's expensive. And then they again elect MPs, members of parliament throughout the country, and they come to the chamber, parliament, and then they select a new government. Okay, it could be, or the prime minister goes, and another member of the party could come, and if he has enough support, then he could form a government, and without an election. That's a different story. So now let's talk about what is the disadvantage. What is the disadvantage in being a prime minister in a parliamentarian system? That is just what I said. It is easily removed. It could be removed. In a president system, he is elected 4 years. American president stays there, right? Some countries it changes. I'll talk about it. It stays there. It could be removed for, yes, crimes and misdemeanors, high crimes or misdemeanors. Constitution gives the provision. Both the chambers have to vote, especially the Senate has to vote two-third. That's right. And the House majority vote. So now with the Trump, the Democrats voted to remove him first time and second time also. The Senate is the one which acquits or not. Okay. There's advantage in the presidential system. Write down the presidential system. and we'll talk about the drawback. Benefit of the system is he draws the mandate of the entire nation. What does that mean? Draws the mandate of the entire nation. That means president is the only one. Think about it. In America, he's the only one where he runs in 50 states. All the people in 50 states vote. No other person gets vote from the entire nation. So he gets a national mandate to do it. Okay? His policies they approved. That's why they voted. And the drawback of it is, I already have said, it's a gridlock. If there is opposite government party in the legislative branch, his agenda could not be done. Biden came in with majority members of his party in the House and a simple majority, actually 50-50 in the Senate, and vice president is also belongs to his party. So then 51, the vice president could break the tie vote if 50-50. 50 Democrats, 50 Republicans are in the US Senate, and she breaks the tie vote, and because of that, he got the bills to pass through. Of course, there's problems that they could do, stand up and give a long speech and stop the bills, and that we don't need to go in. It's called filibuster. It's based on the pirates, but we don't need to go into that. But in general, he has it. Now let's talk about semi-presidential system. What is the advantage? The advantage is the people select a direct mandate. Hey, do this, and select a president, and also indirect mandate, which is a prime minister also selected by indirectly, because they don't vote for everybody in the country, vote for a prime minister. Members of parliament gather, and then they select one among them to be prime minister, right? So what's the prime minister's job? The prime minister's job is to do what the president tells you. He sets the agenda, president sets the agenda, and the prime minister executes the agenda. And in foreign policy, the president takes care. The prime minister mostly domestic policies. Okay, it's usually it's a subordinate position, but the drawback is if they start fighting in policy and things. If the conflict between prime minister and president happens, that's the drawback of the semi-presidential system. Are you following? Okay, cool. And now let's talk about political parties. Political parties. When I say political parties, what comes to your mind? Yeah, Democrat and Republican, and that's in the US. What else are other parties? You don't see other parties. I mean, those parties, these are the two major parties. There's parties, but these are major parties. Whereas if you go to Israel or India, you will see enormous numbers of parties. So whole list of parties, national parties, and especially if you go local, like state level, oh, they have their own parties. Like the state I come from, there's like ADMK, DMK, all this are not national parties in India, but just regional parties. They call them just regional, okay? And countries, India is a democracy too, and the US is a democracy. Why some countries have two parties like the US, some countries have, and some countries have multiple parties. Well, one of the things is Americans is a presidential system, and even in the beginning, the founding fathers didn't think of parties. There was federalists who created the federal government, supported it, and they were anti-federalist. And one of those anti-federalists later went on to, or I should specifically say, Thomas Jefferson created Democratic Republic Party, and then it split into Democrats and Whig Party, and the Whigs later become a Republican Party. Okay, and then you might ask, why don't they create a third party, fourth party, national party? It was created like Teddy Roosevelt created another party called Bull Moose Party, third party. There was a Democrat, Republican, and he ran as a third party candidate, Bull Moose. But never in American history the third party candidate getting the election, winning the election. It doesn't happen. Why? Because I'll talk about that soon. It's appealing to diverse set of people. A party is like an umbrella. The larger the umbrella, you could bring people of different backgrounds to vote on one thing. So if it's like the Democrats, they are like, people, you support environment, come, this is our party. And if you support women's right to abortion, come, this is the party. And do you support immigrants coming to the country? This is the Democratic Party. So you are bringing in all Republican. Oh, you're for gun rights? This is the party. You are for small government? This is the party. So you bring diverse people into it because it's winner takes all here. WTA, winner take all parties. Whereas in countries like India or Israel and other parliamentary, there are small parties there, and they also will have their member get elected to the parliament and will have a say, especially if the prime minister doesn't have majority of the people in the parliament, elected members in the parliament, not of his party. He cannot form the government. He has to get the support of other people who doesn't belong to his party, and that is called coalition government, COALITION, coalition government. For that, he has to get the support of all the other smaller parties. So they will say, oh, I will support you, but you have to give me this policy is done. All right, I'll do it, even though we don't stand for it. We need your support. So like that. Are you following? So two party and multiple party. And there's also one party countries. China. Yeah, Communist Party. One party, single party. Okay. And of course, sometimes dictators like Hitler abolished all the other parties when he clenched power. He clenched power through democracy. We'll talk about non-democratic regimes. And then abolished all the other opponent parties. So single party. And so in China, there's no other party. Everybody joins. If you want to join a political party, you have to join that Communist Party. And that's your way to work your way up. So that's parties. Now, you will understand parties a little bit more through what I'm going to discuss now. Let's write it down. Electoral systems. We're going to discuss different electoral systems in different countries. What is electoral systems? Like how they elect their members. How? So, for example, the first one is called SMD, single member districts. You know districts. Single member districts. So this is like they elect individuals. That's what we have in the US. Okay. Even in India, it's winner take all. Single member district. That is, multiple people could compete. Okay. But there will be one winner. There's only one winner. Even if you lose by one vote, you're gone. You cannot represent. You won't have your say. That one winner, single member district. And there's other countries that have multiple member districts. Multiple member. That means there will be multiple, it's not multiple parties. Okay. It's multiple members could be elected. How is that? I will explain that more clearly. Write it down. Proportional representation. Proportional representation. Proportional representation, for example, is in country like South Africa. Okay. Write down these examples because I will ask in the exam, if I ask these questions, to write examples. So you need to know. And if you Google or anything, it could give you a wrong answer. You will get it wrong. South Africa is a proportional representation. It doesn't have single member district. So there you would vote for the party, not for an individual, the party. So say there are 100 votes. Okay. And not 100 votes, 100% is there. And so people vote, 40% of the people in that district supported one party. 20% supported party B. 40% voted for party A. 20% voted for party B. Another 20% voted for party C. So now there will be representatives of party A and party B and party C in the lawmaking place. Of course, the percentage will be based on the percentage the party win in the district. So it's multi-members are going. Are you following? Proportional representation, proportion based on how much percentage of vote. In this, the advantage is that even small voices, like an ethnic group, a religious group, a minority group. Their voices could be heard in the halls of Congress or parliament, or whatever you call Reichstag, any word you use. That could be where the lawmaking plays. Their voices could be heard. It's not like winner, he takes everything and the loser doesn't get his voice represented. The small voices also could be here. And there are countries, there are advantages in this both, right? And because the advantage of this proportional representation is, I just told you that even smaller ethnic group, religious group, their voices could be heard. In single member district, you want individuals who has the full authority to make decisions on behalf of all the people. Some countries are smart to combine both of this. What do you mean combine both of this? So each voter in Germany has it 50-50. 50% single member district, 50% proportional representation. What's that mean? So I am going to vote in Germany. I'll have two votes. One vote, I select the candidate who I want, single member district, and then the other one, I put it on a party I want. So it could be different. This person I voted for could be a different party, and the party I want could be a different party. But here you're voting for a party, and then the party, how much percentage the party wins, that much percentage will be represented in the legislative branch. That's proportional representation. So in Germany, it's half. In Japan, it's 60% single member district, 40% proportional representation. You follow? So countries change based on their design of electoral system, how they want to elect the people, what system they have, and how they elect their people. And so that's how. Now, you learned political parties, electoral system, and now we're going to move on to referendum and initiative. Referendum and initiative. What is referendum? You heard of this word, right? Right. So referendum, I told you, in direct democracy, indirect democracy, like in the United States, you elect a person who will go and make decisions on your behalf. Correct. In a referendum, some states have it. In the US national level, we don't have referendum option because the Constitution doesn't allow it. But state level, so they will put it in the ballot. Ballot means where you're going to go vote. They will put it, hey, do gays should be allowed to get married? Yes, no. And the ballot will determine, the people in the state will determine what the state law should be. So referendum is not done in the national level, as I said, in the US, but other countries have it national level. So for example, New Zealand, and New Zealand, Italy, they have referendum national level and changed dramatically changed electoral and legislative process. Electoral process, legislative process, they could change it based on what people say. Isn't that interesting? And another country, write it down, Switzerland, is the closest it comes to direct democracy. Direct democracy is like what the Greeks did. What do you mean closest? Because they ask almost everything to the people. All the big major policy decisions, the people vote. Do we need to have increase the number of nuclear power plants? I don't know. You decide. People vote. And because it's a small country and people have a much say in their government, and referendum decides that. The United States, we don't have the national government does not ask the people. State governments do ask people. And in Switzerland, almost every major policy decision they ask. It's the only country closest to direct democracy. Now, there's another one. I told you referendum. There's initiative. Initiative is the government is not putting like that in the referendum. People ask for signatures, and you qualify a certain number of signatures, and then you could put that in the ballot and ask people to decide on that particular issue. This is like forcing something you want. Oh, I don't want people in the state to smoke marijuana, say for example, and they put it on, get signatures, put it in the ballot, and the people could decide all of that. Some people say, oh, that's great because people, even small group of people can make a change. Then there are others who criticize it say, well, if you have that, there are a lot of people don't know the technicalities and how good or bad for it is for our country, and they will vote on it. And so uneducated people might vote is their criticism, the critics on an initiative. Okay, so that's referendum and initiative. Now we're going to talk about two wonderful things, and then the lecture will be over. Write it down. For a democracy, these two things are important. That is civil rights and civil liberties. Civil rights and civil liberties. Now, you probably heard of this interchanged and used, but they're different. Civil liberties, I'll talk about in America, and then I'll go to other countries. Civil liberties are enshrined in the US Constitution, where? In the Bill of Rights. The amendments to the Constitution, the first 10, for example, are Bill of Rights, are called Bill of Rights. And they give your right to speak, freedom of press, freedom to practice your religion, right for a jury trial, or all the list goes on, right? The 10 amendments, and all of them are put in there to protect the individual from the violation of the government. The government, federal government, doesn't violate it. That's why they put it there. Okay? And so those are civil liberties. Whereas civil rights are group rights. So civil liberties are for freedom from the government. Civil rights are for equality. Freedom versus equality. I've told you, the seesaw fight. Equality, civil rights is for. Equality for what? Usually minorities are oppressed. So when I say civil rights struggle, you think of Martin Luther King, who marched for African Americans because they didn't have equality in the society. Some would say we still don't have equality, right? And they marched for it because they will be having equal rights as other Americans, especially the white Americans they're talking about. And that's civil rights. And that's also, some scholars say, working towards achieving civil rights, equality for some group people, actually improves the civil liberties for everybody. So, win-win. Okay. Now, in some countries, civil liberties are much stronger. Like, for example, South Africa has clearly mentioned in the Constitution you cannot discriminate based on sexual orientation. The United States does not have that. Yeah, it doesn't say explicitly sexual orientation or disability, right? And so and you have to argue, otherwise it's stayed there. And if you go to Nordic countries, right, and there they have rights for housing, right, for education, right, and housing, how many people here we live homeless in America, right? So the rights vary. They give more rights certain places, they don't, right? And because if you give more individual freedom, it does have a problem with the equality, as some would argue. But some would argue increasing equality actually increases civil liberties for everybody. Okay. So civil liberties and civil rights are fundamental for democracy. It's not just giving vote to people, you could call it a democracy, right? So for example, Russia is not a full democracy. I will discuss that. Even though they say voting, it's non-democratic state. Really? Yeah, because it's an illiberal democracy. It doesn't have civil rights and civil liberties protected as like in the United States or other healthy democratic countries. We'll talk about that in the next lecture when we discuss non-democratic regimes. Okay? And I did not discuss these 5 points. I have to discuss this. Now, how are 5 points? And after this, the lecture will be over. I promise. How are democratic governments formed? What do you mean? Like I said, when the United States created its democracy, wrote its constitution, 1787, there wasn't any democracy around the world. right? It was Tsar ruling in Russia and our kings, right, in England. And here we are giving power directly to the people. So then now so many countries have democracies. Out of the 193, more than 100 countries. So how did this change happen? So these 5 types, the first one, write it down. Scholars studied modernization. Modernization, countries' modernity. So technologically and educationally, when you get advanced, modern country, non-modern countries, backward country, they said modern country will increase democratization. But some scholars say it's not completely true. Modernization, there are some countries, say for example, Middle Eastern countries, Arab countries are modern, but they don't have democratic. Modern in sense they have all the technological advances and other things, but they do not have a democracy, right? So that is not a strong predictor whether modernization creates democracy. Second one, write it down. Elites and democracy. Elites and democracy. What is that? There's a strong research supporting it. And elites is, so when a country started becoming richer and richer, there will be a lot of middle classes created. And that could be written down as bourgeoisie. You heard of the word bougie? Yes, it came from bourgeoisie. Bourgeoisie is the word used by Karl Marx. We talked about in the first class. Bourgeoisie, the middle class, upper middle class, will actually, once they get wealthier, they will demand for access to power, so that power is not concentrated just with few people or with one person in an authoritarian state. So they will ask for democratic rule. So the countries will become democratic as they become more prosperous. Communities are created, that is bourgeoisie, middle class. Okay, so it's the elites of the country pushing for access to power. Now the third one, you could write it down as international relations and democratization. Now this is interesting. This is exporting democracy, I would say. Exporting democracy means, like when World War II, the United States defeated Nazi Germany. It didn't alone, it along with the help of the British, some French, a lot of help of the Russians. They took the brunt of the Nazi war machine. We defeated, and when we defeated, at least in the Western Germany, right? Eastern Germany was occupied by the Russians. Western Germany, we created a democracy. Similarly, America defeated Japan. Okay, it's put most of its energy, and the Russians didn't do any help. A little at the end, the English were exhausted. The Americans defeated the Japanese, and we occupied. Douglas MacArthur, the general, 5-star general, was occupying Japan. Okay, he was the viceroy, and he wrote a constitution and created a democracy. He even gave women the voting rights, all these things in Japan. So we did create, and in the modern times, Germany and Japan were successful democratically, even now, right? But we did create in Iraq after we overthrew Saddam Hussein, and in Afghanistan. Those are not immediately boom Jeffersonian democracies sprung from the ground. It didn't, but it's getting there. It's not getting to the top level, as I said. It's step by step moving. It will take time. Okay, so this is exporting democracy, international relations, intervening from outside and creating democracy. Okay, the next one, culture and democracy. When I say culture, scholars study say like, well, do culture have an effect? Culture, that is, what do you mean culture? So the Middle East, take a Middle East, Israel is a democracy, but look at the Arab countries, they're not democracy. So many countries, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, right? They're not democracy. And Egypt, why are they not democratic? Why are they not democratic? Some scholars would say, well, these Muslim countries, even if you look at the culture of go back to the roots of Islam, Prophet Muhammad was both the religious leader and political leader. He was also the military leader. Okay, if you read the history of Prophet Muhammad, it's fascinating. If you take my international relations class, I talk about that here. We don't have time. And even after Prophet Muhammad's death, there were 3 caliphates. If you are Sunni Muslim, majority of the Muslims are Sunni in the world, and 85%. And these three caliphates were both the religious and political leaders and military leaders. And then, excuse me. So later, if you look at the caliphates which govern, have the power, there's separation of church and state, like in the Western countries, the Western idea. Religion and state are together. So a single powerful man ruling is part of the culture, is the argument. And so democratic ideas are foreign to them, to say the least. Okay? So those cultures, democracies don't blossom easily. Maybe that could be one of the reasons for Iraq and Afghanistan. The democracies didn't flourish as much as it did in Germany or in Japan. Okay, so the last one, society and democratization. Society and democratization. In that society, I'm talking about civil society. Write it down. Civil society. So what is civil society? Anything outside the realm, R-E-A-L-M, realm of the government. So examples in the United States, Boy Scout, environmental group, religious groups. All these are groups organized. People come together, network, right? America had it even in the beginning. Alexis de Tocqueville, when he wrote the book on 1830, Democracy in America, he talked about the society, civil society outside the realm of government. So government doesn't go and organize this or ask, there's nothing politics. Because these things exist, this will help create democracy in some societies. So societies which already have these civil societies, organized for purpose of like water, for example, or for the purpose of education groups, they will spur those movements coming together, working together towards a common goal. They could work together. In graduate school, I had to study a whole course called Global Civil Society. So these groups create democracies in those countries. Okay, so those will, and countries like say North Korea, the state doesn't allow civil societies because civil societies will spur democracy. They don't want to. The people in power, the Kim Jong-un's family doesn't want power to be taken away from them. So civil societies will be dissuaded. Are you following? Okay. So those are the 5 reasons for democracy to form in countries. And you learned quite a bit today. Watch the lecture. And if you have a documentary, please write those points for that as well. Good luck.